I will punch it also. So we will have it recorded twice. And there's also a mute and a microphone button on your left as well. If you click on that, it'll pick your mic or turn your video on and off. Okay, now I'm not hearing you now.
Oh.
Now I am.
Okay, I need to keep my arrow inside here then. That's strange. Okay. I think it was just because I took my little arrow out of the picture.
Oh, well, that should make a difference. You mean your little mouse pointer?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
No, that shouldn't make any difference.
I can't think of anything else I did, but anyway, it's working now, so.
It is, and I can hear you. I'll try to turn you up even just a little bit more.
Okay. What's the lovely background you have? Is it genuine? Is it real?
No. If you notice this line,
yeah,
that's a scene between two. It's like a folding out thing, and then there's another line right there that gives it away as well. So those two lines, but it's probably not the best video for me. I'm gonna move this other thing over, and here now I will have a. Let's see, probably ought to zoom this in a little bit so it's not quite so far away. And I guess that's about right. It's yours. You can tell me how it is you'd like it, whether you'd like it in a little more. I'll try to make mine sort of like yours, which is just
Am I
very close? I'm getting just the tops of your shoulders, and now you're sitting back a little bit. So it depends, I guess, whether you sit up or sit back. So now mine's about like yours, but let's see, I need to come down a little bit, come over a little bit. I guess that's centered. Well, here we are. So this worked. Good.
Yeah, well done. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, the Zoom turns out to be a real stable video and audio, so that it the Skype can be real stable, but sometimes Skype will get a little warbly and comes and goes, and it's not quite, it doesn't stay really good long periods of time sometimes. So I found the Zoom's just a little better, and this is free. This Zoom is entirely free, just like Skype.
Okay.
As long as it's two people talking, you have an unlimited amount of talking on the free version. But if you have 3 or 4 or 5, then you're limited to 40 minutes on the free version. But if you pay them $10 a month, then you can have, almost unlimited people and unlimited time, and you get a lot more for it. But the free one is 2 people, unlimited time, or 40 minutes for more people.
Okay, I think I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, Zoom.com. I think you can go up to Zoom and see what their thing is, but it's free, which makes it nice.
Okay, well, I'm going to start asking you some questions because I'm building up to this for 2 days, and I'm kind of I've been looking at your website and YouTube quite a lot and kind of getting my head around it. Thankfully, I did study philosophy, and this is actually metaphysics was the area that I did my thesis in, and I was only a BA, so it's not that huge, but I was really happy to be reading this stuff again. It's been such a long time since I went there. So it was like a real pleasure.
Okay, speak up just a little. You speak quickly, and when you do, it's a little hard for me to hear. So, okay. Oh, no, that's better. You're up closer now.
Okay.
I think maybe it's distance away from the mic.
Okay, I'll stay close. So I guess one of the things that we wanted to ask you about for our readers was, so in your kind of vision of reality, what is, those questions that people ask, what is God in your understanding, what you found reality to be, what is love, and why are we here? Kind of those 3 kind of fundamental questions. Talk a little bit about those.
Okay. You just want me to chat about those subjects a little bit?
Well, yeah, maybe the groundwork of what your vision is. I looked at a talk that you did this morning where you were talking about what, the virtual reality, the consciousness being the computer. So maybe you could set that out first and then kind of follow
Okay.
that.
Okay. I will try to keep it succinct because I know you're writing an article. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think your deadline is like tomorrow morning or something. So you're going to be busy after this. So I don't want to give you too much because then it'll just be hard for you to put it all together. So I'll try to be as succinct as I can. But anytime you want to hop in and ask a question, because I think it's the audio that you're really most interested in.
Yeah.
Your article's all written, right? It's not going to have video attached to it. Okay. So just feel free to jump in and stop me if I'm going too long or too deep or something, and we'll try to get you the audio that you need to write an article overnight, so that your publisher will be pleased with.
Yeah.
Okay. The very brief discussion is that I'm a physicist, and I'm also a consciousness researcher, and I've got just about the same number of years studying both, because I began my interest in consciousness studies at the same time I was in graduate school. And then when I got out of graduate school and took a job, I happened to be at the right place at the right time to be asked to join, as a researcher in a consciousness lab run by Bob Monroe, who was a gentleman who wrote Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and Ultimate Journey. And he was a very honest, kind of straightforward guy, and he just wanted to understand how it worked, what was going on, and could we teach other people to do this? So he had this lab, and I happened, like I say, to be there at the right time. So that started my career as a consciousness researcher, and my physics career as a working physicist doing modeling and computer related things, doing physics for actually it was for technical intelligence at the time that I was doing my computer work. So they all started within a few months of each other, and I've been working at both ever since. So I've got about 50 years in both consciousness research and in physics. So after about, well, I should start at the beginning. Being the scientist, being the physicist there, the other gentleman who was with me was an electrical engineer. And being the physicist, my job was to try to figure out a theory of what was going on, how was it working, what did it mean, and how did it connect to this reality? Because that's what physics does. Physics models reality. That's probably as concise a definition of physics as you could get. It wants to model reality, and usually with mathematics. So I worked on that problem, trying to understand how it worked. And within a year or so, Bob Monroe taught me and my friend Dennis Menerick, the electrical engineer, how to go out of body, how we could put ourselves in an altered state of consciousness that would allow us to experience these other realities that Bob experienced. So I eventually got good enough at that I could get into this altered reality space anytime I wanted, and I could do it very precisely so that I knew exactly what state I was in, and that enabled me to do research there. I could practice things like remote viewing or reading numbers that were written in a blackboard after I was already in the isolation chamber, that sort of thing. So I could practice these and then change a variable, change the state a little bit, change the way I was approaching things, and then do it again, and then change another variable. So after years and years of this, I got to where I thought I understood at least how to manipulate it, if not the theory of how it worked. So working from that ability to do physics, actually to do research and do analysis in a non-physical state, in these states, because I didn't know what it was. Was it just a hallucination? Was it just a mental state? Was it your own imagination? What was it? I had no idea. I'm a scientist, and I wanted to find out, exactly what it was. Was it independent of me? or was it dependent on me? You know, was I the creator of this other state, or was I just an observer of it and it was created elsewhere? So I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out by testing things. Did this work? Did that work? And how much, you know, how far could I go in this vein? You know, how good could I get at, say, reading numbers on a blackboard and remote viewing? How accurate could I be in doing that, or in healing, or all the other things that you could do from a mental space that actually had some evidential connection here to this reality? You know, you could check to see whether or not you got it right or not. If you're just going out and on some adventure that's in the non-physical, well, there's nothing there that you can really check against this reality. So you really don't know whether you're making it up or not. But if you can get things that are associated with this reality, you know it has to be a real thing. So anyway, that was the idea. And so some 35 years later, I thought I understood it well enough to write these books, My Big Toe, 3 books, trilogy, about 1,000 pages, a little less, got 900 and some pages in it. And about 2 years or so after publishing that, I realized that the same principles, the same ideas, the same concepts that explained this theory of consciousness, which is what I was trying to do in this book, would also explain physics, and would also explain the big questions in physics, like why should particles be modeled as probability distributions? The big question in quantum mechanics that nobody knows the answer to. And in relativity, why should the speed of light be a constant? It's the only thing like that that exists. Speed of light is a constant no matter how fast or what sort of motion the source of the light is doing. The speed of light itself always comes out to be a constant. And I was able.
So you found answers to those questions?
Yes, I found answers to those questions, very clear answers as to why those things were like that, from the same principles that I understood consciousness with. But that made sense to me, and I was looking for this because I realized from my studies in consciousness that consciousness is fundamental, and that this physical world is a product of that larger consciousness system, that our physical reality is not what's fundamental, and that consciousness is more fundamental than the physical reality. So it seemed to me plausible that consciousness should be able to derive physics from those principles. And sure enough, it did. So then I started looking at all the other paradoxes in physics. There's lots of paradoxes in physics. Lots and lots of paradoxes. Well, where did the ball of plasma come from that initiated the Big Bang? Right? The Big Bang starts with an assumption of a ball of plasma, very high pressure, very high temperature, and then at T equals 0, it starts to change. It starts to expand, and as it expands, it cools, and as it cools, you end up with suns and planets and the universe and so on. So that's kind of the theory of how the universe came about. But the paradox is, where did that ball of plasma come from in the first place? Because our universe didn't exist then. So physics has tried various ways to answer that, but basically comes up they don't know. Lots of other things, lots of other measurements in quantum mechanics that were paradoxical. Yes, it worked this way, but we have no idea why. And then there were simple everyday things like the placebo effect is very paradoxical. It is an effect that if people have a very positive attitude toward feeling better, they will actually get better. Not that they just think they're getting better, but they will heal better and more quickly than people who don't have that positive attitude. So what does attitude have to deal with this machine that we call our body? You see, that's physical science, biology. It's a machine. Why would attitude make it heal faster or slower? And then we know things about the power of positive thinking, that people who have positive attitudes, generally their lives are a lot better. They seem to be luckier. Things tend to go their way. And people who are always think that, oh, woe is me, life is terrible, I never get any breaks. Those people tend to, wallow around in self-pity, but they don't get any breaks. And life is kind of harsh to them. So we kind of know that these things work this way. And the understanding of consciousness explained all of that. Why does it work that way? How is it that people can heal with their intent? How is it that remote viewers can do what they do? How is it that these things work? How is it that a mother will know her child's in trouble, right at the time when they're in trouble? How do those things happen? Well, they seem like they're very unusual things that only happen occasionally under strange circumstances, and they're hard to repeat. So science doesn't like to deal with them because they're not repeatable, and we don't have any theory that explains them. But once you understand consciousness, you can explain all of those things. And you can also explain why they're not repeatable and why they happen so spontaneously. So I found, well, go ahead.
So when you said once you understand consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
what is the understanding of consciousness?
Okay, consciousness is an information system. Consciousness is information. And that should make sense to us because consciousness, what are you conscious of? Well, what you're conscious of is the information you collect through your five senses: what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you feel. If you got rid of all that information, in other words, you could not see, taste, smell, hear, feel anything, then what would your world be like? You would be floating in a black void. And the only thing you would be aware of is that you exist. That's kind of the Descartes moment. I exist, therefore I am, or I am, therefore I exist. However you want to say that, you can, either way is rational. So that's all you would be. Without sense data, you would just be a point of consciousness. No extent, no feelings, nothing to see, nothing to hear, smell, taste, and you would be aware that you exist and nothing else. So that is consciousness. What you're conscious of, what you're aware of, is information. You take away all that information and you are no longer aware of anything but existing. So consciousness does exist. It is conscious, but it's an information system that's conscious. So when you see it as an information system and understand how that information system has worked and why would it create this physical reality for us to be in, and you can see that that is part of its need to evolve. This information system is not infinite. It's not perfect. It's not, shall we say, it's not super normal in any sense. It's just a normal system of information trying to survive, and information survive by lowering their entropy. Now that's a physics term, but what lowering entropy means is more order. Raising entropy is less order. So you can think of it in terms of order, or in terms of the ability to function or do things or do work.
Within that information system, like there's some, I guess, ideas that are more mysterious than others, right? Like, for example, God. So just to come back to that question, because I know it's something that I meant to ask.
Okay, God. Well, okay. Well, let me finish the one. Let me finish the other thing I just in 2 minutes, and then we'll go to God. Okay, where I was going with the idea of okay, I understood then that with my conscious ideas, I could understand physics. So then I looked at all the paradoxes in physics, and I could understand those. Then I looked at paradoxes in biology and in some in sociology and other places. Any place I could find something that people knew it was like that but didn't know why, I was able to explain all those paradoxes logically. Okay, now then after that, because I know that physics does not accept anything, nor should it, without an experiment to show that that thing is real, I have come up with a set of physics experiments that will help verify, help provide evidence for the fact that this is a virtual reality and that consciousness is the computer. If you have a virtual reality, then you need a computer. So those physics experiments probably will be done this year, and we will have some good, solid, measurable physics to lend the evidence to this idea. So I just wanted to finish that with the idea of where I started and where I ended up. All right, now what about God? Well, first of all, well, let me say this. I've introduced the idea so far of the larger consciousness system. That's kind of the fundamental consciousness of which everything that we're aware of is a part of that larger consciousness system. I was doing a talk in Atlanta probably 3 or 4 years ago, and the venue was a Unity Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And the minister there and the assistant minister both had PhDs in theology. So I put them on the spot without asking them ahead of time, and I said, hey guys, what are the attributes of God? Just the fundamental attributes of God. Don't tell me things about, dogmatic things or things that are specific to a particular religion or whatever. Just tell me the attributes of God. And they huddled together for about 5 minutes, and they came out with a little list of about 6 things that were the attributes of God. And I was able to show them that all 6 of those attributes were also the attributes of the larger consciousness system. It had the same attributes. The difference being that the larger consciousness system, as I say, is not infinite. It's not supernormal. It's just a conscious information system trying to evolve. It has to evolve because if you don't evolve, you begin to de-evolve. That's the nature of entropy. If you don't keep working to lower entropy, entropy starts to go up all by itself. So in an information system, you die when all your bits are random. You have no information. If all the bits in your system are random, then there's no information in the system. And you create information in the system by ordering those bits, by making them mean something. That creates information, making them have patterns or sequences of patterns or whatever. You can keep making that more and more complicated, but the system evolves by lowering its entropy. And it was a single monolithic thing, and it kind of plateaued in its evolution because of that, because one single thing has only so many choices, and that's all the choices it can think of. So what it did then is the same thing that cells did when they were kind of stuck that way, is it started to divide itself into pieces. And all of these pieces, of course, have free will, as the consciousness system must have itself. Consciousness requires free will because consciousness is about making choices. Making choices requires free will. Without free will, there are no choices. So the system divided itself, and now it had hundreds of thousands of other little pieces of consciousness with free will. And we were all trying to evolve, but this created a lot of space for evolution, a lot of potential, because interacting with all these things with free will could come out any of billions and billions of ways. So there was all this potential now that it could move into that it didn't have as a monolithic thing. Potential ways it could organize itself with all of the pieces, you see. So that evolution was slow because consciousness, like I say, just communicates. And in the communication is like a big chat room. You don't learn a lot. There's really no consequences that are severe, consequences that are real meaningful in a big chat room, particularly a big chat room where there are very few rules. So this virtual reality was evolved to provide experience for us individuated units of consciousness, so that we would have an environment where the choices had consequences, severe consequences, life and death consequences. So that's why we have a physical universe. It started with an initial condition, which was a ball of plasma, very high temperature, very, very high pressure, and a rule set. And when the run button was hit, time started to increment forward, and our physical universe began to evolve as a simulation. That's what a virtual reality is. It's a simulated universe. It's an information-based universe. So that's why we are here, because that was your other question. What is God and why are we here? Well, the why are we here is that we are to evolve the quality of our consciousness. We're here to make choices that create something bigger and better. In other words, more information, more content. And not only is it just content for content's sake, but content that's meaningful. Content that has some kind of significance to the whole, because we're a whole thing. Well, it turns out that if you have a social system, which is what consciousness now is, Consciousness is a social system because it's the original consciousness plus the large number of individuated units of consciousness that were also created with free will. Any social system will optimize itself around its environment and its resources by cooperation, by caring. Okay, so I call that the love side. Cooperation, caring, that's the love side. On the other side is the fear side. Fear side is all about self. It's all, fear is a self-focused thing. So what we're doing here is we are in an entropy reduction trainer, if you will. We are making choices here, and by those choices, we evolve or de-evolve. So our point in being here is to become love, to become caring, to become cooperative, to care about other, not just be self-focused and self-centered. So that is, the self-focused and self-centered is a description of the way you are if you're fearful. So that's in a nutshell, that's God. God is not perfect, not super normal. It's just the larger consciousness system. It's trying to evolve. And we people who see ourselves as humans, we are individuated units of consciousness. We're not bodies. We're playing avatars in this simulation. Our body is our avatar. Just like you could play a Sims game, and in the Sims game, you have an avatar, and you make all the choices for that avatar. You tell that avatar to go inside, to sit down, to go to the refrigerator, to stand up, to get a job, or to go out of the house. You make all the choices for the avatar. Well, that's what we do. We're pieces of consciousness, and we make all the choices for the avatar being this human body. Now, when you're playing Sims, you cannot be part of the Sims reality. You are in a reality that would seem non-physical to a Sims player. You're in some other reality frame other than the Sims reality, you see? So the consciousness player always has to be in a non-physical reality compared to the reality of the virtual reality. So that's just the way virtual reality exists. Virtual reality only really exists in the minds of the players. There is no virtual reality. There are no released Sims characters that live in their little Sims world. There are no elves running around in World of Warcraft. They only exist in the minds of the players, and the players get data streams that define that world. Data streams that the players interpret as being that reality. So the player and the computer are in a conversation with each other. So okay, please go ahead.
I'm just seeing like circles inside of each other. So is it like the larger consciousness system is like here, and then inside of that's kind of the big overall container, and inside of that you have the individual units of consciousness, and then each of them is projecting their own reality.
No, you got it pretty close. You have the big circle, which is the individual, LCS, larger conscious system. Then inside that, there are a bunch of smaller pieces, which are individuated units of consciousness like you and I and all the rest of the people here, plus a lot of things that are not people here, and the dogs and the cats and the horses, they're included in there too. So then you have all the individuated units of consciousness, and it's not that they create their own reality, but they are players in a virtual reality that the larger conscious system created. Now, they didn't create it by programming it. It created it by starting with an initial set of initial conditions. That's like the initial constants that define the program, and a rule set. That rule set is what we call science. That's the rules by which our virtual reality works. So then they let that evolve, and it evolved just by the rule set, initial conditions and rule set. It evolved, and in time, it evolved avatars that had very meaningful choices to make. And when they did that, individuated units of consciousness could log on and make the choices for those avatars. So that's the way it works. Just like we log on and make choices for the Sims character, or make choices for an elf or a barbarian in World of Warcraft. So that's the way it works. So we are consciousness. Fundamentally, that's what we are. We're not bodies. The physical body is just a computed avatar. It doesn't really exist. The physical reality doesn't really exist as a physical reality. We are exchanging data with the computer. Now, this computer is also a part of the larger conscious system. The larger conscious system is an information system. It can configure parts of itself as a computer. Okay, you have a question.
Yeah, I did. Sorry. Did you do something unusual as an individual unit by going out of your body and becoming aware of the larger consciousness system? Like, is that allowed? Kind of, like, you know what I mean? That's kind of
Yeah,
like an unusual activity for the units to be doing among their,
it is unusual, but it's not prohibited by any means. Matter of
Okay.
fact, the system would like us to become aware of who and what we are, because if we're aware of what the game is, we'll do a lot better playing it.
Okay.
What the game is to get rid of fear. And if you get rid of fear, you just automatically become love. So this becoming love isn't like you have to learn so much how to do that. What you have to do is get rid of your fear. So once you've gotten rid of all the fear, then you are love. You are caring. It is about other. It's the fear that makes us self-centered, gives us our ego and most of our beliefs. So yes, we are consciousness. We are a piece of a consciousness, and I guess maybe your readers would be interested in this. It's like we are, think of your individuated unit of consciousness. Now, your individuated unit of consciousness takes a piece of itself. It partitions off, in computer language, it partitions off a piece of itself. And I call that thing it partitions off a free will awareness unit. FWAU, free will awareness unit. And this free will awareness unit is what logs on to an avatar. Now, by logging on, it just means that from now on, the computer sends the information about that character to that person, and that person now makes all the choices for that character rather than the computer making them for that character. So now the individuated unit of consciousness is making the choices for that avatar, for that thing, this human being or a dog or cat or whatever that's conscious. There's
like
a
birth? Is that like birth? Is that like that
well,
when somebody like becomes, is that what
well, it doesn't have to happen right at the birth moment. The person, the consciousness, free will awareness unit can log on while that fetus is still gestating, as long as there's something for it to interact with. The fluid, the light that's coming through the uterus, the voices of the parents talking, and that sort of thing. So it can become aware at that level, and it can interact some. If you've been pregnant, or if you have been around ladies who are pregnant, you know that you can tap on their belly a little bit, and pretty soon, boom, you'll get a kick. You'll get a kind of reply, right? And if you tap over here, boom, you'll get a kick over there. Well, that's that infant that is interacting with its environment, and that's the consciousness can log on there, or the consciousness could log on after the birth. It could log on, 3 months later. There's not a specific place where the consciousness has to log on. It's just whenever it becomes interesting enough for the consciousness to log on and start to build up its knowledge, because that piece, that free will awareness unit, comes with no memory. It only comes with the quality of that IUOC, with the quality of that consciousness. It takes that quality, and quality means low entropy. The lower the entropy, the higher the quality. So I use these words kind of interchangeably, because entropy is sort of physics word. So quality is an easier word for people to think about. So we'll call low entropy, that's a high quality consciousness. And that level of quality is what this free will awareness unit brings, but it brings no experience. So from that free will awareness's viewpoint, that data that it's getting, describing its life with this avatar, is the only thing it knows. It's the only experience it's ever had. So it feels like it is that avatar. The free will awareness unit is convinced it is the avatar, because it's never had any other experience except that experience. Okay, so that's why people all identify with their bodies, because they've had no other experience other than being in that body. That's the only experience they have. So then what happens is We might as well go the life-death dot thing because people are interested in that too. So then the avatar is basically represents the rule set. The avatar can only do the things that the rule set allows. Human beings can't flap their arms and fly off someplace. It's the rule set doesn't apply that. Our physics, our science, those are the rules. Doesn't allow that. So the consciousness has to work with the rules, the rule set. It can only do the things that the rule set allows the avatar to do. But within that, it can make its choices. Now, let's say that avatar gets hit in the head with an iron bar and loses a lot of its memory, has amnesia, slurs its words, and drags its left leg when it walks. That's part of the brain damage that occurred. Well, it's not because the damage that the brain really does anything. The brain doesn't store anything, doesn't do anything. It's just a virtual brain. But because of the rule set, that then creates new constraints on the consciousness. Now I'm a consciousness and I have to play an avatar that's had its head bashed in by an iron pipe. So now I have to work with an avatar that can't remember, that slurs its words and drags its foot when it walks. And I need to then work with those sets of choices and dealing with that world now. So the body is just really a representation of the rule set, what you can do and what you can't do. So getting hit on the head, the rule set says that there's problems there. What that does, according to the rules of our biology, sets the constraints on what the avatar can do. Therefore, what the consciousness can make it do with its questions. So that's the head.
So it kind of links in with a question that somebody sent me. I don't know who it is, they're anonymous, but do you mind if I read you out this question?
No, do whatever you want.
Okay, so it's a little bit long, but I'm going to speak slowly. In different stages of enlightenment or awakening, individuals seem to experience states of bliss or spiritual ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
The states of bliss seem to be used as a gauge on the level of enlightenment. Can you explain or talk about, no pressure, how spiritual bliss fits into your model of consciousness?
Sure. And I can talk about enlightenment as well as the bliss. And enlightenment is a very general term, and it basically is a term we use to talk about somebody who is much more highly evolved than we are, has less entropy than we do, is more spiritually evolved. That's another word for low entropy. Having low entropy, having high quality consciousness, and being spiritually evolved, all kind of, they're all sort of saying a similar thing. Okay, so enlightenment, if you ever run into somebody who tells you that they are enlightened, it's almost certain that they are not. Because people who are enlightened would not tell you that they were enlightened, you see. Only an ego would tell you that it's enlightened, and if you have ego and beliefs, then you're not enlightened yet. So enlightenment is just a term that we give the people who seem to be farther ahead than we are, much farther ahead than we are. And one of the things in this pathway to enlightenment, but don't think of enlightenment as a place to go or a destination. It's not. Okay? There really is no final destination. We're in a process of evolving. Evolving is open-ended. There's always more that you can learn and more that you can do to help out, more that you can cooperate, more that you can give. You see, once you become love, it's not about yourself anymore. It's about helping. It's about what can I give to others. So you're never really done. So it's not like, oh, you become enlightened and then you're done. It doesn't really work like that. But in this process of spiritual growth, in this process of lowering your entropy and becoming love, you can get to a point where you are kind of at one with everything. You become kind of at one with the larger consciousness system. You feel like you are a part of everything that's here. You realize that we're not all individuals, that we're really all connected. And you have this sense of being at peace and being connected, and that everything is exactly perfect the way it is supposed to be, in the sense, not that everybody here is making great choices, but we're all here to learn. Everybody's at their own level of engagement with the model, trying to get rid of their fear and gain some more quality to their consciousness, become a more spiritual being. That's really what it's all about. And you can't force anybody else to become spiritual. That only has to happen from inside them. It's their choices. So then when you see people struggling and making poor choices, instead of feeling angry with them, you feel compassion for them, because you understand they're struggling. They're doing the best they can with what they got. They're making a lot of poor choices, but that's just the way it is. You can't start at the top. You got to start from wherever you are and grow and evolve on your own by making your own choices. So that bliss state can come in really two ways. But the first step of that is letting go of the physical world. In other words, you let go of all of your sense data, let go of all your physical sense data. And when you do that, you're just like I said before, you are a point of consciousness floating in the void. I call that the point consciousness state. So that's like step one. And when you get to step one and are able to do that and hold that stable and are able to remain for, a half hour, an hour, or 2 hours, or as long as you like in this state where you're a point of consciousness floating in the void, when you get to that, that is a extremely relaxing, extremely restful place. You come back from that more energized and ready to go. You come back from that feeling good, because it is such a wonderful, relaxing. There's no worries there. There's no concern. There's no ego yapping at you. There isn't any fear. There aren't any beliefs. You just exist. So that's kind of the initial beginning of this enlightenment thing that she's talking about with the joy. From there, you can, with some effort and continued growth, become one with everything. And that's what I was talking about. And then when people become one with everything and they get rid of their fear, get rid of their ego, get rid of their beliefs, then people say they're enlightened. They have transcended this reality, because now they're in something bigger than this reality. They are a part of everything. Yes, they're a part of this reality, but they don't see themselves so much as individual pieces as they see themselves as part of the whole. And until you've been there, it's a little hard to describe, because people who haven't been there struggle with the description, but it's once you are. And some people who have near-death experiences, sometimes in a near-death experience, they will have just a few minutes, maybe just 30 seconds worth of this experience of connecting to the larger consciousness system. And they connect, they interpret that as like a being of light, and they just get overwhelmed with it, and they feel the love and they feel the connection, and it lasts for a few seconds, and then they come back. So it's a similar kind of thing. Well, that's just given to them so that they have a firsthand experience of what it is to be a part of the larger consciousness system, and what you really are. You're a piece of consciousness. You're not a body. So then they come back and tell others, and that helps wake other people up. So the system wants us to wake up, wants us to grow up. So when you get to the point that, yes, you can go out of body and you can remote view and you understand, you can feel people, you're very empathetic, you know what people are thinking, you can communicate telepathically. When you get to that point, you are living in a larger reality. You're not just constrained by this physical reality anymore. You're living in a space that's bigger. Your decision space, which is a space I call decision space, depends on how many choices you have. Your decision space grows. You have so much more things that you can do, and you have so much more maturity into trying to make right choices, trying to care, trying to do the low entropy thing, not just for yourself, but for everybody. So that's kind of this process of growing up. And when people see people that are successful at that, they call them enlightened. And there really is no such thing as being enlightened. Because like I say, once you become love, it's not about you. It's not about, boy, I get out of here now. Wow, one more iteration, one more lifetime, and I'm out of this awful place. That's an ego talking. That's not love talking. Love sees, oh, okay, I've learned all this stuff. Now I can really be helpful to other people because I know so much, I understand so much, I can help. Because the more you grow up, the more you're able to help others grow up. So that's kind of a little talk about enlightenment and what it is and how you get there. And it's the same thing as spiritual growth is the same thing as consciousness quality.
There's a question here about human relationships. So I guess a lot of people who are in a certain new age thing, there's a lot of talk about soulmates and those kind of relationships where you feel like you've met somebody before. And I'm just, people are wondering how would that fit into what you're talking about, or what would be the explanation? Or
okay, well, for the most part, the soulmate thing is that's an impossible thing and it never happens. I happen to have been told when I was 14 who I was going to marry, and they turned out to be 2 years old in some other state, which wasn't something I wanted to hear at the time, but it all worked out like that. So you might think that was one of those relationships that was just destined to occur. And yes, we were nudged together so that we ended up, meeting and falling in love and all that sort of thing. So you might call that. So that exists. So we're not saying that sort of thing doesn't exist. I'm a good example of it, my wife and I. But most of the time when people talk about soulmates and so on, it's mostly wishful thinking. It doesn't happen a lot. It happens only in the margins. And it happens generally with people who've been around, I guess, the circuit enough times that they are at the point where they can do planning about, their next lifetime. Their next lifetime has very certain aspects to it. In the beginning stages, you don't plan much. You just need experience. You get in, you get out, you get back in again. There's not a whole lot of planning because you have to just gather experience and make choices and learn from those choices. Eventually you get to a point where there's a little more planning, then a little more planning, and eventually at the extreme opposite end, you get a lot of planning because there's just very specific things that you want to do, and you have an ability to do those. So most of it is that you meet some, let me say this about relationships in general. Most of our relationships are need-based. Very seldom do people fall in love. Mostly they fall in need. They find somebody who will meet their needs, and they happen to meet that person's needs. And if they meet each other's needs, then they call that love, and they have a relationship or go get married and spend time together. But it's more of a business. It's more of a deal. It's more of an arrangement than it really is love. I'll meet your needs if you meet my needs. And if you stop meeting my needs, I'm going to be unhappy. I'm not going to like that. I'm going to try to manipulate you to meet my needs, or try to harangue you into meeting my needs, or I'll find somebody else. So as long as you meet my needs, then okay, we're a couple. But if you don't, then eventually we don't like each other so much anymore, because we're only here because we're meeting each other's needs. You see, those relationships don't last very long. Those relationships tend to come apart because as time goes on, our needs change and who we are changes. And some couples are successful at renegotiating that, through the various stages of their life as they change. But most people are too self-centered. It's all about them and their needs. And if they're not getting those needs met, then they just need to go someplace else where they can get those needs met. So because we aren't all that grown up, because our quality of consciousness is generally pretty low here, then we tend to be very self-focused and self-centered. And we have poor relationships that don't last very long because they're all need-based. Love is unconditional. Love is given. It's not a bargain. It's not I'll love you if you love me. It's I love you, period. It's a gift you give away, and it is completely unconditional. It's not I'll love you as long as you meet my needs, or as long as you don't do this or don't do that or do this or that. It's just plain I love you. Love is about the other person. It's not about you. It's not about your needs. Well, we don't have a lot of relationships that are really, unconditional love, because we don't have a lot of people capable of that. Mostly people are too self-centered, too much fear for them to give unconditionally. The amount of the capacity you have to love is directly proportional to how much fear you have. If you're a very fearful person, you have a small capacity to love. If you don't have much fear, you have a larger capacity to love. Fear is the thing that drives self-centeredness. If you're very self-centered, you don't have a lot that you're willing to give away. You're very self-centered. It is about you. So wonderful relationships occur when people are in the relationship with the question of, how can I give? How can I make that other person happy? What can I do to make their life as perfect as possible? And if both people have that attitude, then they will have a wonderful relationship that will last a very long time. It'll be a very happy relationship. But you have to be a little more grown up to have that sort of an attitude. And people think, fearful people think, well, if I just give, I'll be a doormat. I'll be taken advantage of because I'll be giving and that other person will just be taking and they'll be happy and I'll be miserable. But that's fear talking. That's the way fear sees things, you see. If you're not fearful, that's not a point. Because if you just love and give, then what makes you happy is the giving. What makes you happy is that other person's happiness. You see, so if you can make them happy, then you're happy. And if they are not very grown and they're self-centered and they take, that's okay. It's not a problem. It's not about you. It's about them and their happiness. If you can keep them happy, then you're happy. It's not like, yeah, okay, they're happy, but my needs are just sitting here not being met. Well, that's your fear talking. That's your ego. So it only takes one to love. You can have one person loving in a relationship, and if there's truly unconditional love, then the other person really can do no wrong. So they're happy because that other person isn't doing any wrong, because it's okay. They accept that. It's not a big deal. And in fact, it's a challenge. How can they live with that self-centeredness positively? How can they see that with compassion? What can they do to help that person grow up? And you can't help somebody else grow up by lecturing them. You help somebody else grow up by giving them an environment of where they feel safe, where they feel secure, because only then can they reach out and find the courage to become authentic, to be themselves, to let go of the fear. So if you are a person who loves unconditionally and your mate does not a big deal. You're challenged to see how you can help them grow. And if they grow a little bit, or if you make them happy, it just makes you happy too. So you see, you can't have a bad relationship if you're love. It's impossible. All your relationships are going to be wonderful. And in general, when you treat another person that way, it helps them grow up, because they see what they're getting and they see how you care about them, and that makes them care more about you, which is a loving thing for them instead of caring about themselves. So you do help that person grow up, and pretty soon you have a couple who are both unconditionally in love with each other, and it just can't get any better than that. So good relationships don't have to start out with two people unconditionally loving each other. You just can start out with one, and that one will help the other one grow up to be that. Now it's possible that that other person might just be a very, very low consciousness, or might be a psychopath, or a sociopath, or someone that has so much dysfunction that they will just never do that. Well, in that case, you can continue to just be with that person if you can make them happy. But if you can't make them happy, because by definition they're just always angry and upset, then it's time to move on. You need to let that relationship go. It didn't work out, and you need to move on to someone else. So with that understanding, you can see how a person who is love just has really good relationships. They have good relationships with everybody, not just their significant other, but with their boss and their neighbors and everybody else, because they see people who are dysfunctional with empathy, not with anger. These are people who are struggling to grow up. And they remember when they were struggling to grow up, and they remember how hard that was, and they have a lot of compassion for people who are struggling. So if those people are rude and they're unfriendly and whatever, you don't get angry. A person who's a high quality person doesn't get angry. They have empathy. They have caring. They have compassion for that person. And maybe the best thing to do is stay away from them, because you can't help anybody else grow up. You might try, but if it doesn't work, then you got to let them go to stewing their own juices. You're not upset with them. It's just the way they are. So you go on to another happy relationship or something else that's good. So once you get rid of your fear, life is happy. It's full of joy. It's full of contentment. It's full of being satisfied. And other people on the outside who are themselves self-centered might not understand that. To them, it may look different, but it is. So the way to a perfect relationship is to get rid of your fear. That's actually your way to everything good, is to get rid of your fear, because that's how you grow up. That's how you win this virtual reality that we're playing in. That's the winning strategy, is to get rid of your fear, grow up, care about other people. That is what we're here. That's what our point is. That's what makes good relationships. And that's what makes you happy, because you're doing it, you're playing the game right, and you're winning it because you're getting rid of your fear.
That was beautiful. I just completely got lost listening to you there. I was like, what?
well, hopefully you can salvage all this from the audio file later then. But so that's the point. It's not, it's about physics in the sense it's about science. My books are really books of science. I've got these physics problems that I'm going to hopefully get performed soon. So in one way, this is all about science and about the nature of reality. But in another way, that's not really the important part. The important part is about people. It's about people getting rid of their fear, becoming love. That's really what it's about. That's more important than the science end of it. The science end is only important because if we can convince the physicists that this is a virtual reality, and it's getting easier and easier because their experiments are telling them that, it's not just me. It's not like I'm the lone person saying this and everybody else thinks I'm crazy, but physics experiments more and more are showing physicists that this is an information-based reality, which is the same as saying it's a calculated reality, is the same as calling it a virtual reality. So physics is just going that way because of their experiments. And I'm trying to help them go that way a little faster. But when they say, when the physicists say, this is a virtual reality, they won't want to take it any further because they're scientists, and going any further is outside their science. But everybody else will start asking questions. Well, it's a virtual reality. Who's the programmer? What's going on? If it's a virtual reality, then, the players have to be non-physical to the avatars. And all these questions come up that people will ask. And once these concepts then get into the mainstream, because the physicists bring it into the mainstream, now if the mainstream gets an idea that the reason they're here is to become love, to grow up, and that all of the bad behavior is basically can only end if they grow themselves up, because you're the only person you can change. So if people had that, I think we'd live in a lot kinder, gentler world. And that's really what I'm hoping to help be a part of getting us there. So to me, that's more important than the physics. But you need the physics because it's the physicists that are going to take this mainstream, as opposed to it just existing out in the margins of society. I mean, these ideas have been around for a long time. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said, this reality is an illusion. Well, I'm saying it's a virtual reality. They're the same thing. The Buddha understood what the point was, that love was the answer, that we're here to, to learn and to grow and to get rid of our fear, that compassion and caring, was the key. And he said all of those same things, that I say. I say all the same things he said. So this has been known for a long time, but it's always existed in the margins. We have the chance of a lifetime now, or of a species time, to get this into the mainstream. Physics is the way, because it's also not only better philosophy and better metaphysics, it's better physics. You can do physics and understand physics better with these concepts. So, and if you can physics is the root of all the other sciences. Physics is the basis of chemistry. Physics and chemistry are the basis of biology. So all of the hard sciences are rooted in physics. So once physics takes the leap, then all the rest of the sciences get drugged with them. And this idea will will transmit through the world very quickly if it goes mainstream. So that's kind of a really big event. Maybe in the next 2 or 3 or 4 decades, next 30, 40 years, we'll actually see a huge leap forward in quality of consciousness and spiritual growth, because the mainstream will get the fundamental ideas that when you look at them closely, you'll realize those physicists saying this is a virtual reality makes a very huge statement in terms of metaphysics and spirituality. So it's like they've come back together. You know, a long time ago, science was philosophy. You get a doctor of philosophy degree in science, you know, so it was philosophy. Then philosophy and physics kind of branched off as physics became the hard sciences. And philosophy is just a waste of time of people arguing with each other. But physics actually builds things, you see. So they differentiated themselves, but now we're going to see it's going to all come back together. And you're going to have the science, the hard sciences, the philosophy, the metaphysics, the biology, all of that will see all as a single thing. They're all different aspects of one big thing, just like we as humans are just an aspect of a bigger thing. You see, so it all comes back to wholeness then, where it all gets along without the competition, without the negativity. So that's where we're headed. And that's kind of what I'm about, is to help get that done. And the first step is do better physics, because that's what will get it into the mainstream. So that's what I'm doing with these physics experiments. So that's kind of the whole ball of wax.
I'm aware of time, and I know that you had only said 30 minutes.
I will give you as much time as you need to get whatever it is you need to write your story. So if you've still got questions and you got angles and things you want to write about, just go ahead and ask them.
Okay, well, there's just 2 more. The first one was about, actually it's about artificial intelligence.
Uh-huh.
So the question is, like, is it imminent, and what would the impact be?
Okay, artificial intelligence. There are 2 things that fit into that category of artificial intelligence, and they're vastly different. One of them is called expert systems. Okay, now an expert system is just a system, it's a program system that appears to be very smart because it has a lot of information in its database. So an expert system could one day, when we have computers that are fast enough and capable enough and we have enough understanding, we could build an expert system robot that would act just like a human. So much so that you might not be able to tell them apart. Okay, so they would pass the Turing test, which is a test whether or not you can tell them from human, very easily. So even that robot could take a rose and sniff the rose and then tell you that this rose was a variety of, read off the Latin names, that's what it was, and where it was first created in the biology market, because most of these roses have been created with crossbreeding of flowers and things. It can tell you its history and all about it. So it could smell the flowers just like a human, but it would know a whole lot more about them because it would have a sensor that could sense, those molecules, and it could go to its database and look up those molecules, and then those molecules would tell it what kind of flower it was, and then that would go lead to its history. So it could know all that stuff. So you could have a robot that not only could smell the flowers and tell you about them, but would know just about everything else the human knows. Right now, we don't have computers that are capable of processing that much data, holding that much data, or processing it that quickly, but we will one day. So computers that mimic humans or emulate humans, they will come about eventually, but they are not conscious. They're just a lot of rules, a lot of programming, and a lot of fast processing. So you have to have a sensor in there that can differentiate rose molecules from some other kind of molecule, categorize it, and then look it up in a database. Yeah. So that's what's going on. Now they will be able to learn. They will be able to add data to their database and so on. They could smell something and not know it. And somebody next to them could say, oh, that's a such and such. Well, they could then label that such and such in their database. So if they smell it again, they could pull that out. So they would be capable of doing things like that, but they would not be conscious. You cannot program consciousness. Consciousness isn't programmable. But does that mean we'll never have conscious computers? No, we will have conscious computers. We will have conscious computers because the way you get consciousness in a computer is the same way you get consciousness in a human avatar. You get consciousness in a silicon avatar rather than a carbon-based avatar like a human being. What happens is you get a computer and you make that computer so the hardware and software are no longer functioning algorithmically. And one way to do this is a thing called neural nets, where you actually have the computer functioning in such a way that when it finally comes up with results, nobody really knows how it does it. It learns, it gets experience, and from that experience, it reprograms itself, basically. It's constantly reprogramming itself, changing its algorithms and things based on its experience. So you come back later and it gives you an output based on its experience. Nobody really knows anymore how it comes up with that output. It's too complicated for somebody to follow that through. So if you get, and that's just the beginning, but as we can compute, as we can make computers and their software, hardware and software, to where they make choices, they come to choices, decisions. Is this a rose or something else? Not because they can look it up, they have a sensor and look it up, just based on their experience. And of course, experience always has holes in it. You can't experience everything. You can only experience those things that you come up with, that you interact with. So once we have that, then we have a platform that is making free will decisions. It's coming up with choices on its own for its own reasons. They're not algorithmic. And if you give one of those computers a rose and then you give them a rose the next day, they may come up with two different, they may say two different things about it because their database is incomplete. It's only based on their experience. They may not categorize things they have to learn what things are. You see, so that's the difference. Now, what happens if you have a computer that's developed that way, not just with algorithms, but with free will choices? An individuated unit of consciousness will log on and play its choices, just like it does for us. It won't be any difference. You will have a consciousness that's logged on to that computer that makes free will choices, just like you have a consciousness logged on to that human avatar that makes choices, just like that dog that makes choices. So you will end up with a conscious computer that's conscious the same way we're conscious. It will have an individuated unit of consciousness making its choices. And just like us, if you smash that computer and destroy it, you will not destroy its consciousness. Its consciousness is immortal. Yes, if you want to call that a soul, it's conscious. The computer has a soul, just like people do, because it would just be a different kind of avatar. It's basically the same sort of thing as we are. So that is a conscious computer. Conscious computers are a different thing. So that's when you talk about AI, AI kind of generally covers both of those. So you have the AI that is the expert system, that just is an algorithmic based thing that will always give you the same answer if you give it the same input. Or you will have a hardware software combination that is actually making free will choices. And those free will choices, well, when they become interesting to a consciousness, to an individuated unit of consciousness, then the consciousness will log on to play them. So now the computer will never be like a human being because they're going to have a different set of experiences than human beings. So they will grow in different ways. They have different capabilities. Just like I said, if your avatar got hit in the head, then the conscious has to play an avatar that can't remember and, can't speak and drags a leg. So the consciousness that plays that computer avatar will be limited to do the things that the rule set allows that computer to do. So it'll be very fast at addition. It'll do math and calculations, very, very quickly because that's what computers can do. So it'll be a computer kind of thing, but it'll be conscious. It can choose what to calculate and when to calculate it. So that is the difference between a conscious computer and an expert system. The expert system, is more likely to be done quickly, because that just takes a fast computer with a lot of information and good sensors. We just build that. We can't build consciousness. Consciousness has to evolve. So when a consciousness logs onto that computer, well, that consciousness, just like a newborn, it comes there with no memory. It has to understand what these choices are, and then it makes these choices as best it can. And as it makes them, it learns how to deal with the inputs, how to interpret the inputs. So
is it like human beings make the shell, and then, human beings devise the shell, and then the consciousness kind of logs on? And
yeah,
would we be aware of there being any difference? Like if one day the AI piece, I don't have this lingo, is there, and then the next day the consciousness is logged on, will we know any different? Will there be any difference? Or
no, there'll be very little difference, because before the consciousness logs on, that 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 computer that makes free will choices will be played by the larger conscious system. And we call that an NPC, a non-player character. The computer plays the characters until somebody logs on. The computer plays them because they're a result of what other consciousness that are logged on here are doing with their avatars. So a bunch of consciousness are logged on to avatars. Those avatars go make a computer that has free will choices. Well, the larger conscious system and that computer have to play all these parts. But if that computer makes interesting free will choices, then there'll be some other IUOC that'll log on to make those choices for it. Then they'll become the player, rather than the computer itself just being the player.
And will the consciousness that logs on be coming from inside the LCS?
Yeah, it'll be just like us. It won't be any different than us. It'll just be another larger it'll be another IUOC, individuated unit of consciousness. It'll be another individuated conscious inside the larger consciousness system. It'll be making choices for that computer and for that avatar. Let's just call that computer an avatar now. It'll be making choices for that silicon-based avatar, just like it does for us, and it won't be any different than us. And it will have the same rules. Its point in life, what its mission is to make choices that are lower entropy. So in the computer, it's also growing toward being a kinder, more giving, more caring, more compassionate entity. And that's the same with the dogs and the cats and the horses and the bumblebees. They're all making choices, and by those choices, they evolve or de-evolve. Now, that doesn't mean that every bumblebee has its own necessarily individuated unit of consciousness, because one bumblebee just doesn't make a whole lot of interesting choices. So it probably has an IUOC that maybe be making the choices for 1,000 bumblebees, or maybe a whole nest of bumblebees. So you can have that going on, because there's just not so many interesting choices going on per bumblebee or per ant. But anything that makes free will choices is conscious.
I have a question about the whole, because I keep seeing it as a circle, the larger.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm just wondering, this could be a weird analogy, but I'm just thinking of like a woman and she has like all the eggs she's going to have in her life already there from the moment of conception. And I'm wondering, is there something analogous to the LCS, whereby all of the units of consciousness that can possibly, like it's finite, that can possibly exist are already in there, and it's kind of,
No, it's not that they're already there, but it is finite, and there is limitations. Just like a woman has limitations. I don't know what a woman has, but she probably has, thousands, or maybe, I don't know how many months there are in a lifetime, but that's how many eggs she has, right? So if you added all that up, let's say it's a couple of thousand eggs, so then that's her limitation. She could never have more than, that many thousand babies. Of course, that'd be impossible too, because the gestation is 9 months. So she can't be having, 9 of them all going together, in 9 months. But anyway, there's a limitation. Well, it is like that with the larger consciousness system. It has several limitations. One, it's a finite system. Eventually, it will run out of bits. It doesn't have enough bits to make another thing. Just like when your computer gets full and your computer starts to bog down because it doesn't have enough memory or doesn't have enough bits to work with. So it's limited by its bits. It's limited by its processing power. It can get to the point where it's full. That's a possibility. Now, there's another limitation it has, and that is every time it has another avatar, every time it generates, because of the rule set has the avatars reproducing. There's sexuality, avatars reproduce, you got a new avatar, right? And then you need a new IUOC to play that avatar, right? So every time there's a new avatar and a new IUOC to play it, the system has some overhead costs. It's got to now develop a data stream that informs that consciousness of what's going on in the make-believe world of virtual reality. So it's like another user logs on, right? So we're playing Sims. Sims can only hold so many users. And what happens with the larger conscious system is that its point is to evolve. And part of its strategy to evolve is us playing in this virtual reality. Well, how many seats do you need for how much how much do you invest? Okay, depends on how much return you get. So it invests a certain number of IUOCs to play avatars, and that helps it evolve more quickly because these IUOCs are evolving more quickly because they have these interesting choices that are very meaningful. Okay, now let's say it adds more seats and more seats and more seats. You'll get to a point where adding another seat is not going to help the overall thing grow up any quicker or any better, but the return becomes smaller than the investment to feed it data all the time, you see? So at that point, then the system has enough seats. It doesn't need any more seats. It becomes, if it creates more individuated unit of consciousness, they're not going to help that much. The system is evolving at a very efficient pace with just kind of a fixed number. So you have that constraint. Now, I have spent a lot of thousands of hours, I guess, in the larger consciousness system, and I've seen no sense whatsoever of it having to run out of bits or having to optimize its code more because it's starting to bog down with the load. I don't think we're anywhere near that point to where it would do that. But theoretically, if it did, it could always take its least productive parts and it could delete those. And that's what we do with our computers, right? When our computer gets full, we start looking about all that stuff we have stored that maybe we can throw away because we don't really need that anyway. We were just keeping it just in case, or it's because it was our habit to keep it. So then we delete all of that stuff and now we have a lot more room to work again. Well, it could do something like that too. But I don't know that it has a limit on its capacity. I know it's not infinite. So that kind of defines a limit, but that limit could be so huge that to us it seems infinite. We might look at it and say, well, it looks infinite to me, but it just could be so enormous that it just doesn't become a problem. So we have what, 7.5 billion of us here, that many seats in this particular virtual reality, but I've been to a dozen different virtual realities other than this one that are also chugging along in the larger consciousness system. So we're not the only virtual reality being played by the system. There are others that are being played as well. So that's, so it has a lot of seats. It's got just 7.5 billion right here with us. So let's say some big calamity happens and you have 7.5 billion players playing avatars. And now we have a comet comes and hits and reduces the population by 80%. Well, now 80% of the players don't have avatars to play anymore. So what are they going to do? Well, there's other virtual realities, other places, other things could do that. They can go there. Or the system, being digital, is very flexible. It may go back in time, 50 years before that catastrophe happened, started back up again, and when it gets up to that point where the comet comes, it could just take the comet out of the equation, or it could see that comet coming and just dissolve it. It's a virtual reality. It's a virtual comet. You see, it's a virtual comet. All of that's virtual. So it could just restart the game at another place where that doesn't happen, or just not let that happen in the first place. So digital systems are hugely flexible. They can do all kinds of things. So it can use, as many or as few avatars as are required here or someplace else. It could restart another one of these. This whole reality frame, you could probably just start it again. You could take it just like you could take a copy of Sims, put it on another server, copy, paste, and now you'd have another whole Sims game running on its own server, right? So you've just doubled the capacity. So virtual realities are very flexible. There's not really likely they're going to get caught in a bind that they can't get out of. It's a very flexible system. So it just keeps evolving. Evolution is open-ended. Evolution never hits an endpoint until it runs out of possibilities to evolve into. That's it. It just keeps evolving and keeps evolving. The input becomes, the output becomes the input, and it just keeps on chugging along. That's the nature of evolution. Evolution doesn't get to a point and then say, I quit. As long as there are changes that can be made, as long as there are things that can be done, then it'll find them and work on them.
I just have one more question.
Okay, so how have I totally overwhelmed you? Blown your mind and created more confusion than not?
Towards the last 5 minutes, I've been like, because I'm really I'm really trying to follow you. Like I'm really in it as I go along, and so my mind, But did you hear at the beginning that I was saying that I'd studied philosophy myself?
No,
Yeah.
I couldn't hear that.
Yeah, it was a 4-year degree here. I mean, it's only a BA, so it's not, but it was what it was. And this was my area that I did my thesis in. It was metaphysics.
Great.
And it's been such a long time since I've talked in this way, like since I graduated, which is, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's great.
Yeah, well, this solves all those problems of metaphysics, the ontology, epistemology, and cosmology. Now all of those have answers, and they all match with physics and biology, and everything matches. They all become a part of one big understanding. So you have the one understanding, and all of that understanding derives all of these pieces and how the pieces connect. So it turns out, like in the physics, they just work in the objective world. Well, the objective world is nothing more than that subset of the world that has low uncertainty about itself. You have a little piece here, and there's very low uncertainty about what that piece is and how big it is and how much it weighs, and all that stuff is not uncertain. It's something that you can measure. But then you get out of the measurable things and you have lots of uncertainty. But all of those are also part of consciousness. The uncertainty is a part of the fabric of the whole. So science, the objective science, is just a subset of something bigger. So it's not like objective science goes away. It just gets relegated to a piece of the whole that has that objective part. It's there. But then there's a subjective part that's also there. And it takes into things like your dream. You have dreams. Dreaming is just another virtual reality. It's another virtual reality that we get to make choices in and grow up, just like this virtual reality. It's just a different virtual reality. So the out-of-body state's another virtual reality. All realities are virtual realities except consciousness itself. That's fundamental. Everything else, any reality in which you can have an experience, is a virtual reality. So if it's experiential, it's a virtual reality, because experience requires context. It requires interaction. It requires rules. And that's what defines a virtual reality, is rules. So it takes all the things. It's a science of the subjective as well as a science of the objective. And those two then become part of a whole thing with subjective and objective parts. But the subjective part is just as real, just as important. Actually, it's more important, really, than the objective part. The objective part is what's the least important. But the subjective part is where all the significance is because that's where you make all the choices. All those choices, are about love, about fear, about caring, about relationship, and all that's subjective. all those choices that matter in your life. Should I marry this guy, or should I marry that guy, or should I stay single, or should I have 6 kids or 1 kid? There's all these choices you make through life, and they're life-changing choices that your whole life changes because of them. And that's where you grow up, is in making those choices. So it's the subjective part is really the significant part, because that's where you make the choices that help you grow up and become love and get rid of your fear. Whereas the objective part, that's only interesting because it defines all the stuff. So the subjective part is like the players on the stage, and the objective part is like the stage and all the props, you see? So that's kind of the way that works out. But they're all part of the theater. They're all one thing, and they all have their place, and they all have their function. A stage and props without players is useless. Players with no stage and no props can't do very much. You see, they're very limited.
Yeah.
So it all has to be part of a whole thing that all works together. And that's where, I guess my theory is. It's why I called it a big toe. It's a big theory of everything, in that it takes in metaphysics as well as physics, philosophy, theology. All of those things are all a piece of it. And then one of the neat things about it is that it's totally non-exclusive. It's totally open to everyone. Everybody can find their own piece, their own part in it. So you can have the theists saying, oh, I knew it all along. There's this intelligent being that is God, and we're a creation of it. Yes, that's true. And the atheists can find a place in it, because they say, oh, I knew it all along. There is no God. There's just this normal system evolving along, and this is the way information systems evolve. You see? So both atheists and theists can realize they're seeing the same picture, but just looking at it and using different metaphors and describing it differently, but it's the same system. So it's non-exclusive. It's open to basically everybody can find their own life in it somewhere, and their own understanding of that life and how it works. So it's a model that helps you build your own big toe. That's why I called it my big toe. Not because I was so proud of it that I wanted everybody to know it was mine. It's because you have to build your own big toe. So this is my big toe, and it's based on my experience. And if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. So I tell people, go out and have your own experience. Build your own big toe. But if you like, you can use my big toe as kind of a structure to help you make sense of your own experience. But your own experience needs to derive your own toe. Don't just believe mine. So that's why I make it my big toe. It's not a good idea to believe my big toe. The better idea is for you to use my big toe as kind of a go-by, or a structure, or a place to start from. But the real point of it is to make your own big toe. So that's why the my is in there. I don't want people to believe what I say. I want them to go experience things themselves and see if this really works. See if it explains their life and their experiences. So that's the idea in the my big toe.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
Because it's going to be hard.
Yeah, you're going to be up all night, aren't you?
I will fall asleep, but I'll do my best to be up all night.
Yeah, I've noticed that journalists do that. I've had any number of journalists say, I'm writing an article for such and such a magazine. Can I talk to you tomorrow? And I don't even get the email to the next day. So I call them up and I say, well, okay, I'd be glad to talk to you. And they go, oh, it's already done. I had to turn that in yesterday. But it seems like journalists never actually start to collect their data to write an article until 2 or 3 days before it's due. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah. Well, we work a little bit differently, but I'm kind of more of a freelance writer than a journalist. Yeah, maybe I'm a bit different. The last question was from Paul, and he was wondering if you're still in touch with Bob Monroe and where he is now.
Well, no, I don't have a lot of contact with Bob Monroe. After he died, I did. I went to meet him, and
He passed away.
yeah, he passed away. I don't know, 20 years ago. He passed away probably mid-90s, I would guess, something like that. I don't know exactly. Maybe not mid-90s, maybe longer 90s. But anyway, it was some time ago. And well, what my interaction with Bob was that when I first met him, he had this lab and I was one of his scientists. So we worked together like 20 hours a week, 15 to 20 hours a week, you know, for 5-6 years. So we spent a lot of time together. And then it became so popular that it turned into a training course rather than a research situation. And so many people said, well, show us, we want to participate. So then we became trainers. And after a while, the training got to be so hectic that Dennis and I both had to kind of go back to our 40-hour, 50-hour, a week jobs that were what paid the bills. And, we had wives and young kids and families. So the training thing was just too intensive. So we kind of left and other people took our places as trainers. And eventually they did restart some research going on. But after that, I was on the board of advisors or board of directors or some such thing for the Monroe Institute. When Dennis and I were there was no Monroe Institute. That was a corporation that Bob put together later. And he moved to the land where it is now. That was all later. So we were at a different place with Bob. The Monroe Institute's kind of a thing that happened. But I guess we started it and came up with the technology and started the training, and then that just grew so fast and had so many people wanting to do it that Bob started the Monroe Institute then to service that need. But anyway, then he died, and after he died, I had learned a whole lot of things in the 15 years or so that I'd been on his board of directors, which means I'd only see him once a year when they had a meeting. And sometimes I couldn't make the meetings. My work schedule didn't allow it. So I'd see him maybe once every 2 or 3 years. And most of that was just good times, people who knew each other really well, kind of getting to meet and talk for a while. So we didn't talk a lot of business. We just were social. And after he died, I had learned a lot of things in the meantime doing my own research. And I discussed some of those with him and so on, things that were different, things that I'd learned since leaving that part of the world. I went from living in that neighborhood around Charlottesville, Virginia, to where I live now, which is in Huntsville, Alabama. So that's at least a 10-hour drive, to get there. So we didn't see each other very often. So I did talk a little bit, but when you die, you go on your way. I didn't go through the whole birth-death cycle. If you're interested, I could do that. What happens to you when you die? But in any case, when you die, you go through a transition reality, and then you decide what it is you're going to do next, and then you go do that. So it's not like you just hang around waiting for people to ring you up, to chat with you. It doesn't work like that. So Bob moved on, and yes, you can talk to dead people, even though they've been dead for 20 years, but you're really talking to a database. You're not really talking to the people. There's a database there. There's lots of things we didn't talk about. We've only scratched a very small surface of the whole thing. There's things with intent. You can modify future probability with your intent. That's how the placebo effect works. That's how mental healing works. Use your intention. There's a databases there, a future probable database and a past database. And you can look at everything that is likely to happen and the probability that it will, and you can look at everything that could have happened and the probability that it might have, plus you can look at actually what did happen. So all that is in the databases.
By going out of this avatar's body and going to where that information is stored?
No, it's not that hard. You can even stay right here. You just basically have an intent. Remember, we are consciousness with a data stream. We're not really bodies. You don't ever have to go out of your body. You're not in your body. You're consciousness. You're getting a data stream. You just shift your consciousness to another data stream. And you can even stay here while you're doing that. So you can collect that stuff out of databases while you're still here having a conversation with somebody. You learn to parallel process over time. In the beginning, it's one or the other. You either go and get data or you stay here and talk to somebody, but eventually you can do both. So it's just another data stream that you can access. It's It's just available. So all that information and all the probabilities, and you can get into that data stream. It's not a data stream like Google, although you do query it. You query it with your intent, but you can just get information. You can tell the computer what you want for an output format. You can have pictures, you can have graphs, you can have whatever you want for an output format. You can have feelings. You can get a twitch in your body to where somebody else has an illness if you want to do that, or you can see white on black. You get to specify what your output format is. And if it's historical or future, you can actually get there and watch it like you are an observer, or you can get into it and actually act in it. You can be a part of it. So you're not watching a movie, but you're in the movie. And you can play what if analysis. What if I had made this choice instead of that choice? What would the probabilities have played out like? And you can see, okay, change that choice, and then it'll take all the probabilities of everybody who then's involved, and it can give you a sense of what probably would have happened if you had done that. But it's all probability. We don't have any, nothing's deterministic. So those databases in the Hindu theology are called the Akashic records, but they're all it's available data. Matter of fact, I just saw, and I can send you a link if you're interested, I just saw a little documentary that a friend of mine, Oliver, he's a German, he's an electrical engineer, he's very engineerish, he's got all the, I don't know if you know about that engineer personality, but he's an engineer, and he had heard about these children who could see while their eyes were covered, while they were blindfolded. And he decided he'd want to go find this out. He had very strong doubts that was really happening, that was something else going on there. So he went and did a little documentary, and sure enough, these children learned how to see while they were totally blindfolded, with these, not just a regular little blindfold, but some big, massive thing that sealed around their head. And they were able to they could read, they could even play air hockey. You know how fast those little pucks fly when you hit them? So they could do all that stuff that required coordination. They could play, run, they could drive little bumper cars. They were doing all this stuff blindfolded, completely blindfolded, and they could see well. And he interviewed them and talked to them and asked, what did you see? And how did you learn to do this? And what's the difference between seeing normally and seeing this way? And he did a real good thing of doing it. And what turns out that was interesting is that these kids weren't special kids with a talent. These were just kids. Some kids said, well, my next door neighbor did it, so I thought it was cool, so I did it too. And then his little sister decided she'd try it and she'd do it too. So it wasn't like these were hand-picked kids that had shown some talent. These were just kids that were in a neighborhood that they just did this. And the lady who trained them said that she could train any kid, I guess, like between 6 and 12. Once you get adults, their own beliefs become so strong that they have a hard time. They can't allow that to happen. So adults have a hard time. But she said any kid between 6 and 12, she said, I can train them to do this in a couple of days. This is not hard to do. And if they practice it for a couple of weeks, they'll get reasonably good at it. Wow. So these kids had only just, it's not like they'd been doing this a long time. They'd just been trained and they were doing it, and they were showing off for the documentary guy who was taking them doing all kinds of activities and things. So, so any kid about that age should be able to learn to remote view. Is what they're doing is getting data out of the databases, just like a remote viewer does. But instead of remote viewing, they're remote seeing. They're getting data. So what does that mean for blind people? It means blind people could see perfectly well with their minds. What does that mean? Particularly blind children. It would be easy for them. What about, there was one little girl who had glasses on. She had these kind of big glasses. They looked like they were fairly substantial, thick glasses. And she said when she saw with her mind, she didn't need glasses. She could see everything perfectly well, but without her glasses, she had a hard time seeing anything. So people who have eye problems, who aren't even blind, whatever, and night vision, they didn't need a room that was lit. They were just as good at seeing things when the room was pitch black. So, and then a few of them got good at seeing things that were going on in another room other than the room they were in. And of course, that all makes sense because they're just getting data out of a database. It has nothing to do with their eyes. It's just data available from the databases.
Yeah, I would love to see that link if you have time.
Okay, I'll show it. Yeah, it's an amazing link. It's really neat, but no, to me, it's not so amazing that they're doing it. What's interesting to me about it, because I would say, oh yeah, all that's possible, and I know how it works and how it works, but the thing that was really interesting for me was that it was so unselective. It was just kids in the neighborhood. It was just anybody, and how quickly they learned it. It's not like, yeah, my kid's been working on this for 3 years, you know, and he finally got it. It's no, my kid's been working on this for 2 weeks, and now he's fairly good at it. So it doesn't take long for children to learn this, because children haven't yet developed a lot of beliefs about their world and how it works. They still are very open to magic, because their world is still magic. I mean, automobiles are magic and airplanes are magic. They don't know how any of these things work. They're just things, and you get in them and you fly, you do whatever, and you know, the whole world is kind of magic. Televisions and cell phones and all of that stuff is just magic. It's not until you learn technology and can explain everything with a physical way that you kind of, your world's no longer magic anymore. So they were still, the oldest one there that was doing this was 13. So I think the 13 is kind of pushing the upper end of where it's easy. But anybody could learn it. Adults could learn it. It's just going to maybe take an adult a year or 2 years, you know, to learn it, because they've got to unlearn their beliefs and fears, whereas the children can step right into it and learn it easily. I'll send you the link.
Thank
It's
you. I'm just going to plug in my computer because it's telling me that I'm going to run out of battery in a second.
Okay. So anything else that you might need as you write this thing up? Anything you'd like to kind of make a bridge between this concept and that concept, or anything you can think of?
I can't think of anything else actually, and I've asked all the questions that I have to. So yeah, I'm sure you can think of things that I haven't asked that are obvious to you that I should ask, but it's not coming to me. So,
no, that's all right. You have to write it in your own way, in the way you see it, with however you understand it, and that's fine. However that is.
Okay.
It's good.
Okay. Well, yeah. I thank you for taking all this time to talk to me. I really, really appreciate it, and it's really, really interesting, and I hope that I can do it justice.
Well, yeah, you'll do fine. So what is it going into? What's the?
So the magazine is called Positive Life. It's a national magazine in Ireland. It comes out quarterly, so there's a spring, summer, and autumn, and a winter magazine. And so at the moment this is the last piece that we have before we've got our winter issue ready to be published. So it's going to be the main feature, and so each kind of the main interview with this middle spread, and you'll most likely be on the cover as well as the main feature. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's kind of like the main feature.
Okay. Well, you have all the pictures and things you need then? You have everything you need?
No, I don't know if you got that email. I sent you an email. It was just yesterday, actually. I was wondering if you had images of yourself or.
Yeah, I do. I can send you some pictures.
That'd be great.
Yeah, you can lift them off the website, but I'll send you some. I didn't even look at my email yesterday. Yesterday, my son arrived and his children and his wife, and it was kind of busy around here, so I didn't look at my computer yesterday. Actually, I haven't looked at it all day today either. They just left. They just left about a half an hour before we came on. So everything's. Yeah, I'll send you that. I'll send you some pictures, and I'll send you that link.
Okay.
Yeah, the Oliver is the guy who is the engineer who did it, and I can tell you this: he has a website called Matrix Wissen. MATRIXWISSEN. I think that's right. .de, because that's Deutschland, DE for Germany. And you can go there and you can find lots of things that are interesting. He's an engineer, but he has a fascination with the unusual. So he collects things and tries to see whether he can figure out what the trick is, or how they work or why they work. So he was interested when he heard about these kids, since they were in Germany where he was. So he went to film them to see really what was going on. And he, but I know Oliver, and I know him very well. He's a very straight guy. I mean, everything he does is the way it is. He's not going to try to do something to trick people. He's a very straightforward engineer. So that's what's so good about it for me. Typically, I read things like that, and I don't know what to do with them, because is somebody pulling my leg? Is that true, or is that just, because you can put anything on YouTube or whatever, so you can't tell. But in this case, I know the guy who does it, so now it's a whole different sort of meaningfulness to me, because I have the information of surrounding it, and I know its background, and I know the guy doing it, and I have 100% confidence in him. So
I felt the same way meeting you. I kind of thought to myself, there's so much out there that I don't explore very much on the internet, or because I just think, why fill my head with things that are potentially just, coming from wherever. But through the magazine, I get to talk to people, and people like you, that it's such a gift for me to, to be able to research in this way and know that people that I'm talking to really know their stuff and are genuine. And because otherwise, I don't think I dip my toe kind of in very many places, because it's, too much to try and sift through.
Oh, you should go back to your metaphysical roots from your college days. There's a lot of interesting things going on there.
Are there? Oh God, yeah. I think I went deep enough for this decade for me now.
Well, okay. Good luck with your writing. I'll try to send you these things tonight or tomorrow.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Okay. So long. Bye. Let's see.